Hello, I'm Jane Fordham, independent people consultant and co-head of people at Hanbury Strategy. Inspired by World Mental Health Day 2020, I'm once again joining forces with the PRCA and this year with CIPR Health on a Leaders in Mental Health podcast series. Thank you, as always, to marketeers for their generous support and technically getting things going for us. This session is the third in the 2020 series, and I'm in conversation with the great and the good from across the communications industry, approaching the omnipresent topic of mental health from a personal perspective, and then sharing insights and best practice in terms of leading other stakeholders through these extraordinary times. Today, I'm excited to be joined by the brilliant Lakhani. Take a deep breath for this. Digital and social media consultant, chair of the PRCA Diversity Network, member of the new PRCA Race, Ethnicity, Equity Board, and curator for TEDx Kingston upon Thames. Wow. Welcome, Rax.
Hi, Jane. How you doing?
Hello. What an introduction. So the Opinion and PRCA research was out recently around World Mental Health Day, revealing a great deal of positive progress in PR in the last 12 months, which obviously is brilliant. No surprise, it covered the impact of the pandemic and, on a related note, attitudes to home working. It also explores the ever-present pressures of workload in our industry specifically. And interestingly, the reluctance this year, the particular reluctance of senior staff to take time out to protect their mental health, which I think is particularly pertinent to this series, obviously, given that we're framing talking to leaders in our industry. So those are a couple of the topics I think would be really interesting to explore in the next 20 minutes or so. But first, Rax, please do introduce yourself, and I'd like to ask, how are you today and how has lockdown been for you?
Hi. So yeah, well, I'm okay. I'm very well today. I've had a really good week. I've spent the last few weeks really talking to the industry about diversity, inclusion, and I think one of the topics that I'm really grateful to be involved in this episode in particular, because mental health for me is an issue that I have been more and more open in talking about publicly. I've struggled with mental health for much of my life. It's something that I've kind of just had to deal with, suffer from clinical depression, anxiety, stress, and it's only in recent years that I've actually been really happy to talk about it openly. I've had this real kind of coming out, this kind of because throughout my career, it's something that I always felt that I had to suppress, keep it a secret, and it's really had a damaging effect on me. And I know for a fact that this is something that I don't experience in isolation. I know a lot of our industry, and looking at the report, for me, it was such an interesting read, and I think that there's some interesting stats in there. But overwhelmingly, our industry is rubbish on this. It's really bad, and it's not a surprise. But what I'm really encouraged with is just different bits of work that's been happening over the last few years, of senior practitioners coming out and absolutely talking about their own experiences openly, frankly, and it's really encouraged people like me, and I know a lot of other people, to suddenly, really analyze, the impact that it's had on their on their work. So yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing. I'm sorry it's had a negative impact for so long, but and I know you followed this series last year, and I think maybe it's useful just to dial back briefly to add a little bit of context. So Edelman have, I think for the third year this year, run a panel with the PRCA around World Mental Health Day, and actually it was the first panel that I sat on that really made me think. It was on the back of some research that had come out as well, and I had an audience question at the end that said, okay, so we were talking quite generally, we were talking about other role models, we were talking about best practice from other places, and somebody said, an HR director of a big agency So who are the role models in our industry? And I said, you know what, I'm actually really going to struggle to answer that. I can probably name drop one or two people. And so this series and a few other initiatives were born. So that it's fascinating and not surprising probably to hear your story. But Rax, if you don't mind telling us, what was it that made it so hard for you to be open until recently?
So I think it's actually a societal issue as well. So it's something that, you know, in my family, it was never really openly talked about, despite, you know, having, you know, very, very obvious examples of mental health issues that was prominent. You know, there was a few suicides in my family, a lot of things, but it was never really talked about. So when I entered sort of my professional career in PR, it was something that, you know, is so inherently part of me that it's not like every day I wake up and I'm defined by my mental health, you know, in the same way I'm not defined by any other feature that I have. But I have actual physical health issues as well, and those probably were dominating kind of my life in my late teens and early 20s. So that's really where my focus was. And I think nowhere in our industry at that time was really openly talking about it, and there was a judgment. There was this judgment, and also it was almost a declaration of weakness if you were to talk about it. But fascinatingly, you know, when it comes to physical health, everyone I've ever met in my life has had some sort of health issue, you know, be it really serious, you know, really, you know, it could be incredibly serious, cancer, you know, terminal illnesses. You know, I've got diabetes, I've got lots of other ailments, but or it might just be a cold, or it might just be a stub their toe. And in no circumstance would they ever feel that they shouldn't go to the doctor, or they shouldn't take help or look after themselves, or that, you know, feel embarrassed or afraid to discuss it at work. It's just out there in the open. But when it comes to this phrase mental health, I think there is a massive block. It's a taboo, and it's a really misunderstood topic, and no one really wants to be the first to come out and talk about it. And it does impact on work. But at the same time, I have to say this, and this is pretty weird me saying this, I actually like my mental health. It's part of me. It gives me an insight.
Yeah.
It gives me an insight that I think other people don't necessarily have. It forces me to look at the world in a different way. And actually, it makes me bloody brilliant at what I do. It brings out all sorts of creative thoughts. And to have to deny that, and to have to frame it in a sense that there's something wrong with me, it's heartbreaking. And I just think of young people coming into any industry still having to feel that we are doing a disservice to ourselves, because we are not unleashing the talent that we need to bring in. So yeah.
I'm so glad you said that, and I'm in a fortunate position to be relatively mentally healthy currently, but life happens, and life happens quite a lot by the time you get to 44. So I have definitely, you know, had my fair share of brushes, and of course everyone in your close circle, because life happens to everybody else as well. So if I think about the narrative that I try and establish with my children about mental health, so that they can be open with us, and if there is a something going on for them, that actually, you know, we call it a superpower, precisely because of that scenario that you've just described. It also kind of reminds me of losing my father relatively young. I wouldn't wish that on anybody, of course. However, on the other side of it, I think it meant that I learned so much more about myself, and therefore, through the same lens of mental health, if you get help, if you talk to therapists, if you do it by yourself, you will have gone on a process and a journey, and therefore you are better equipped to understand how you work and how to get the best out of yourself. So I think that is absolutely, you know, it is a strategic enabler, actually, if you think about that individual and that brain and that health in the workplace.
I would just add, I was thinking about this a lot recently, actually, and you know, when I look at again, I mentioned I'm diabetic, and you know, it's an illness. It's something that, you know, a lot of people kind of are afflicted with, but actually having diabetes has given me a lot as well. It's made me a bit more aware about what I eat. It's made me a lot aware of my exercise. It's just me. So rather than always framing it as a weakness or a negative, it's just who I am. I can't change it. My depression, my depressive episodes, they're nowadays they're very kind of few and far between. But I know that they're there. But just knowing, understanding it, helps me process the world in a certain way. But also, I think it makes me a bit more empathetic to other people. And had I not had this, then maybe I wouldn't be as empathetic. So again, it's something that I've only just started to love and to embrace and to welcome and to accept. And I think that if the industry can make some progress in becoming more accepting and more understanding and supportive, I think that's just a massively brilliant thing to happen.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I'd be interested, Rax, if you don't mind, if you can talk through some of the life lessons, strategies, discoveries, eureka moments over the years that have helped you manage the challenges better, that might shine a light for others.
I think most of them actually just happened in the last few years, which is why I'm like a born again
digital consultant.
So a lot of things, I think, in our industry in particular are by their very design unhealthy. Unhealthy. Okay. Just looking at the report again, just seeing how many people kind of consider stress as just it's a part of the job, and that's just wrong. That I think that just to have that as your truth says a lot about the world that we live in, and the norms that we are expected to conform to. So I think one of the things for me is that the working environment and the whole structure of how the PR agency world in particular imposes quite a rigid kind of framework for people to be forced into. So I think for years I've always suspected that the work environment structure is inherently flawed. It doesn't bring out the best in people. It doesn't take into consideration people's own kind of ways of working, their energy flows. It forces everyone to be shackled to their desk and to produce in 8 hours whatever needs to be produced. Without
on your marks, get set, go.
Yeah, and also it's a level. It's saying this is how things need to be done. And so about 5 years ago, having worked in-house, in government, in agencies, I just went alone as an independent practitioner. It's a massive jump for me. And I have been working from home the last 5 years. And in many ways, it's probably not the ideal setup for someone like me, because I love people, but I still go out and meet people. I still have that. But what it has allowed me to do is really understand how my mind and my body works. So I know, for example, I cannot be creative any time before 3 p.m. Okay? My most creative work in the evenings. But knowing that allows me to actually allow for that. I know, for example, if I have to do any kind of writing, any kind of focus, strategic work, mornings are best for me. I know that, after lunch, it's really good for me to just catch up on lots of kind of admin emails, responses. So I'm very much in tune with how my body is, how my mind works, and I know what allows me to deliver the best of what I can. Now, that approach is completely missing in conventional office spaces. Yeah, most offices that I've worked in, I still carry on working in, don't account for that. They expect people to be performing at an optimum level, regardless of their physical desk or what time of day it is, or what moods they are and how much and everybody is individual, and just pretending that everybody is the same is just weird. It's just odd. And understandably, not every sector can have the luxury of letting everyone kind of figure out their own kind of styles of working. But if we do that, we are going to be producing some amazing work. We're going to let people perform to the best that they can, not feeling that they have to conform, accepting that actually they are really good, but actually they're not really good at this time. So it's those things. And I think the other thing in the agency world is this whole kind of myth that, you know, this 8-hour productive day is what you need to kind of live by. Since I
Like
went,
we're all battery hens.
yeah, I mean, that 8-hour office day is rewarding presence and not
Mm-hmm.
really a rewarding output of work. And it took about 3 years of me operating as an independent consultant to stop beating myself up if I didn't do a full day at my desk, you know, with 7.5 hours
Yeah.
full. And I felt guilty.
Yeah.
And now I know that if I do 3 hours properly focused work, genuinely deep down, I'm good. I'm I'm winning, and then anything else is a bonus.
Supercharged. Do you know, that reminds me of one of the many interesting elements of the report, and I'm probably going to misquote it slightly, but looking at wellbeing and mental health initiatives that were underused and those which the respondents would like to see more of, and kind of duvet days or mental health days were quoted. And that I find interesting because essentially it's your ability to read yourself, just as you've described, Lax, right? So you wake up in the morning and actually, I am really not in a good place today. My 8 hours will simply be presenteeism and nobody will win. So that I found quite telling. I think looking across my kind of client base and, you know, all sort of input, insights, anecdotes over the last 7 months or so, there has been a lot of aha moments with organizations in our sector and outside of different sizes finally getting, I think trust is so important in this piece. And clearly, you know, the vast majority of the world has been forced to trust their staff more. But the realization that actually the world doesn't end and actually output continues and in many instances actually improves and increases. You know, I sincerely hope and believe that a lot of that will be carried forward. How much is obviously a big question mark, but that you don't need everybody to start at the same time, and that people can be masters of their own universe and you know, schedule their day to an extent. However, and I believe that wholeheartedly. However, being slightly provocative and playing devil's advocate, how much of that do you think is reasonable in an environment where, let's think about an agency or potentially in-house, because they have stakeholders that they're beholden to. You know, when you are working in close-knit teams, surely to an extent, you need to be in sync with each other. And you can't all be doing shift work effectively. So how far do you think that premise can be stretched in reality?
No, I think that's absolutely valid, and I think it's you know, I'm not necessarily advocating, you know, a free for all, let everyone go do their thing. I think this trust thing that you raise is one of the issues that's kind of led us to this systemic kind of way of working that just by design has stress, you know, embedded within it, and a lot of that is the expectations that we feel are put upon us. So what this whole COVID situation this year, I think, has really been, and you know, I'm always trying to look at the positive and say, you know, what good is going to come out of this? I think there are a few good things. I think it's overnight we were all forced to absolutely abandon, you know, a paradigm, a way of working that we've never really questioned or challenged. So I think in the report, you know, workload was cited as the main source of stress for, there's about 67% of people. And that is a systemic problem. That is something that we can unpack and say, well, what does that mean? So when we're working with each other, you know, are there unfair expectations on you know, what we need to deliver, and is that healthy and is that productive? Probably not. Are there any expectations to work, you know, above and beyond the parameters of a working day, you know, to respond to stuff at night? I think there are. I think that's really kind of an unstated part of our industry that probably needs to be stamped out, and you know, that can be done. I've spoken to a lot of agencies and agency leaders in particular the last month, who are really now starting to review the structures that they have relied upon, because they see that actually what the last few months has done, people have coped, people have struggled, people have, have managed to get by. And do you know what? It's worked. Okay. I don't know how, because it was absolute chaos. We had no time to prep for this. We were all kind of in it and, figure it out. And we all had our own issues, and it's been troubling, worrying times. But actually, as each week and month has gone by, we've suddenly found ways of using technology. And the technology has always been there. We've just never really embraced it fully. We've always said, okay, well, yeah, this is how we do things, but that's our default. If we can't go and see a client face to face, we'll do a video call. Now everybody is absolutely confident and enthusiastic about doing video calls. I've done a lot of training sessions. I've spoken at a lot of conferences. I've attended networking events. You know what? They're great, but they're only as great as you make them. So if you are if you need a team to work together remotely, individually, but still have this feeling of collaboration and belonging and inclusion, change the way that you're structuring your practices, invent new ways of using existing technology. A lot of people have turned to WhatsApp groups or Slack channels or Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and they're all brilliant, but they're just tools. And it's up to us how we use them. So if you're going to go back to this hybrid model of having some people working remotely and some people working in the office, and that is definitely viable, but you need to make some massive fundamental changes for that to be really effective, for that not to cause exclusion or not to cause any sense of isolation or to compound any underlying mental health issues as well. And there's loads of ways of doing that.
I'm glad you start to talk about inclusion, actually, and I can also hear the leaf blower approaching from my neighbours, which is telling us that we've only got a few minutes left. So I'd like to finish with a bit of a look at how inclusion has been impacted by the pandemic, actually. So it's a massive topic that we'll try and shoehorn into a couple of minutes. But I think I sit on Women in PR committee responsible for their mentor programme, and this year we were blown away by the volume of applicants for the scheme, which is kind of brilliant and sobering in equal measure. So people really, really need that support. But given that the scheme is 100% virtual this year, it actually meant it's really accessible to anybody in any part of the country. So that's a real positive. And similarly, supporting Hanbury Strategy with their intern programme this year, because that was virtual as well, we were able to access a far wider geographical pool. So there are many positives in terms of inclusion and accessibility that these ways of working have brought. But we also know statistically that many already underrepresented groups have been hardest hit, especially by furlough and redundancy and so on. So I am going to ask you a big humdinging question, Rax. How do you think, on balance, the pandemic has impacted diversity and inclusion in this country? Do you think we've moved forwards or backwards, or do you think it's a far more complex picture than that?
Wow, I wish we had a whole day. It's a question that I've been asking of myself a lot, and a conversation I'm having a lot with industry people recently. There's no denying it. There have been two stories this year. One is COVID, and one kind of has emerged out of Black Lives Matter into something even bigger than that, looking at systemic issues around why we have failed to really properly address the nuances of diversity and inclusion. And so the industry right now, through those two stories, has been forced to really examine how its relationship with its employees, with its staff, with the individuals within. Any agency, and most big agencies who previously have been keen to promote all of their kind of sexy sides to their to their company, the big swanky office, the great postcode, the free breakfasts, the social drinks, the away days, all those kind of fluffy things have been exposed overnight because they can't rely on those things as their USPs. So they're competing with every other agency, and they've now realized what should have been obvious for years is that their selling point, their main asset is their people. Okay. And their people have really, really been loyal. They've come up with the goods during this hard year, and people are buying into people. At the same time, there's been this perfect storm where diversity inclusion is now top of the agenda. It's not going away. People are talking about it in a quite a meaningful way. And it's a shame that it's taken this long for that to arrive where it is. But we are where we are right now. And I think that there is a massive panic in our industry to talk about and to get diversity inclusion right. However, a lot of that pressure is actually coming from brands who are now, expecting their agencies to improve. So now there's a commercial imperative. However, I think that the topic of diversity inclusion is very similar, very, very similar to that of mental health, in that it's always been addressed in the same way. There's a lot of confusion about what the terms mean and what the definition is. I think that when people have approached mental health or diversity traditionally, it's been done really superficially, and it hasn't really been long term. It's been let's treat this as a campaign and then forget about it. I think that there's a massive openness to interpretation of what diversity and inclusion means. So a lot of people project upon that, whether it's race or whether it's gender issues or whether it's LGBTQ plus or it's neurodiversity. We all need to come into an agreement of what it means actually, and then we can tackle it. I think that as we move into a whole new way of doing things, we have to start seeing diversity and inclusion as a real asset. And I think up until now, it's been seen as almost as a social issue and a justice issue and a compliance and an HR issue. And mental health is the same. Mental health has always been, approached as we need to be responsible employers, but it's not. If you can really get it right, the main beneficiaries of this progressive work is the company, because you're going to have happy staff, you're going to be doing much better work. You're not going to have, and diversity is the same. If you can start framing it in terms of, if we don't get this right, if we don't change the makeup of our staff as an industry, and if we don't do it soon, we cannot possibly claim to understand the audiences that we're communicating with. And ultimately, we will die on this. Or we will no longer exist. We will no longer be relevant as an industry unless we absolutely attract completely different, diverse views, make people feel included, not excluding kind of people once they are in a good company. So for me, there's a lot of parallels between.
I hope this hasn't turned into a boring vanilla conversation, because once again, I find we share exactly the same perspective. And doing some inclusion training only yesterday, I actually found a lot of my content, a lot of my data points were coming from wellbeing and resilience, corners as well, because at basic human level, if you feel like you belong, comfortable, accepted yourself, and that can come from mental well-being or being accepted for exactly who you are, then what do you know? Cognitively, psychologically, you're more productive. So everybody wins. There's a huge human moral driver, but an incredibly powerful business driver as well. So
I think it just boils down to simplicity of understanding that people are different and almost celebrating it, I think.
Why wouldn't you? We are a creative industry after all, and creativity does not come from homogeneity. So wonderful. The leaf blower has stopped, but I know that our time is ticking away. So Rax, it's been a complete pleasure to chew the fat with you. Thank you so much for joining us and for being so candid.
Can I just leave you with one thing that I'm really
Go on.
excited about? I'm really excited. I discovered a new word over the weekend, and I want to share it with everybody. And I think this is really relevant to what we've just been discussing. And that word is sonder. Have you heard of that word, sonder?
SOND.
NDER.
No.
My new favourite word.
Sounds
Basically,
French.
it's a realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own,
Oh,
populated with our own ambitions, friends, routines, worries, and inherited craziness. And I think if we can
Rax,
all
that's
embrace sonder,
beautiful.
yeah, that's all it is, right? It's just really understanding that people function, have different experiences, and it's just empathizing. And well, I think once we can all accept that, then hey, we're good, right?
Yeah, easy peasy. Thank you
Thanks very
so much, Rax. See you sometime physically.
Take care. Bye bye.